David Bedein, Behind the Scene with David Bedein, in June 2023. This is a series that will explore the American relationship to Israel in these days. Now, the American government has opened up an unprecedented office called the U.S. Office for Palestinian Affairs, operating under the U.S. Department of State, responsible for the interaction with the U.S. and the Palestinian Authority in order to promote peace. Now, that sounds good enough, except that when the U.S. Secretary of State, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, announced the ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian Authority on May 13, 2023, she fantasized that this is some kind of a ceasefire, some kind of a peace, when it is only a hudna. A hudna is an Arabic term for a temporary cessation of fire, and an opportunity to get ready for the next stage. That's not exactly peace. Now, in that statement, she welcomed Qatar, which has been providing arms, munitions, cash for people in the Palestinian Authority, especially in Gaza, also in the UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency, ignoring the fact that Qatar is one of the most vicious of the Arab countries in the Middle East, continue with its support for any act of war against Israel. Now, in terms of the blockage of peace, the U.S. Secretary of State only 2 weeks ago made it clear what he viewed as the only real blockage to peace. That was Jewish communities being built in Judea Samaria. That was it, and they were detrimental to peace. And he didn't say he didn't say some communities. He said all communities. This is reminiscent of the French-English divide on what we call territories after the November 22nd, 1967 United Nations resolution, or the United Nations Resolution 242, in which it said very, very clearly that Israel must strive for peace and give up territories in the process. Not all the territories. The French interpretation was all the territories. The English interpretation was territories. It wasn't so bad. And when Israel relinquished the Sinai, it seemed to have fulfilled that obligation. Now, in addition to Lincoln's statement, there's a whole series of questions I'm going to be asking I've asked of the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, which he has not answered, except to say no. And I want to go over those questions and answers. And we'll see from the questions and answers I've asked of the U.S. Ambassador how we understand the situation of U.S. Middle East policy to foster mutual recognition between Israel and a nation Palestinian entity. That's not what U.S. policy seems to be accomplishing. Now, the Palestinian security forces, trained by the U.S. to fight Arab terrorists, instead carries out daily attacks against Jews. The PSF is dominated by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, designated a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. government. Now, we asked the U.S. ambassador to Israel, will there be a reconsideration of support for the PSF, given their track record? And the answer was no. We also note that the PA has enacted unprecedented legislation. We got copies of the legislation from with our Palestinian Arab staff. We got copies of the legislation, shared it with the U.S. government, shared it with the Israel government, and we asked the U.S. Ambassador Thomas Nides that if the U.S. would demand the repeal of the law, which functions as an incentive to kill Jews. That law again is that if you murder a Jew, you get a salary for life, and if you die in the process, your family gets a salary in life. So we got an answer in writing. The answer was no. Incidentally, U.S. Ambassador Nides approached yours truly at the reception for President Biden and said he hopes to be hearing from me. I said, will you answer? He said, sure. And he has answered every question. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing, because his transparency is also hostile. Now, for example, another example, the Palestinian Authority Education Ministry teaches a curriculum that indoctrinates children to make war on the Jews. Our agency, the Israel Resource News Agency, working for the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research, we've reviewed 1,000 school books provided for the children in UNRWA schools and PA schools, and we haven't found one for peace. But even worse, we asked NIDES if the U.S. will ask the EPA to withdraw a textbook originally from 2018 and republished in 2023 that glorifies Dalala Mughrabi, who murdered 35 Jews, including 12 children, on March 11th, 1978, and she's rendered a hero status. And in this book, on the back, you can't see from the camera there, but it says 2023, a brand new republished book. We've asked the U.S. ambassador to Israel, will you ask for this book to be removed? And the answer was no. We got that in writing. No request will be made. This is not only an insult to the families of the people murdered, but it seems to run against the grain of any possibility of a peace process. Now, the U.S. allocates $200 million to this year to Arab refugees in the temporary refugee camps, temporary since 1949, inculcating the idea of a right of return to villages that existed before 1948. Now, whereas the U.S. had every intention to give this money, legislation which was passed by the U.S. Congress and a contract between UNRWA and the U.S. shows that they're not allowed to get the money until they eliminate the incitement. So a young reporter asked the spokesman of UNRWA, are you changing the school books? The answer was no. Therefore, they've held back the money for 3 years. It's very, very interesting to see how that system works. So I asked Ambassador NIDES, if the U.S. government would favor a change in the policy towards UNRWA so that they would indeed oppose incitement as the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress, the contract requires them to do so. We got a straight answer, no. Now, meanwhile, the PA has issued new school books, which are used by UNRWA, which include 125 maps that replace all Jewish cities on both sides of the 67 lines with Arabic names, a new form of Judenrein. Now, the U.S. government could ask the UNRWA to use standard maps, Rand McNally, whatever, run under the auspices, since the schools are run under the auspices of the UN, to depict the geographic details of every UN member state, including Israel. I asked NIDES, Ambassador NIDES, if the U.S. would make that request. The answer was no. These issues could be the basis of any Middle East policy questions posed in the Middle East in the near future. Now, there's no reason why these questions couldn't be related to in a positive way. They could even have lied. But the honesty of the U.S. ambassador to Israel is the source of our understanding of what's really going on. Now, the U.S. government could maintain its engagement in the Palestinian Authority to advocate peace, but what they have done is to say it's enough to advocate a hudna. A hudna is a temporary, as I started to mention earlier, is a temporary basis for modus vivendi, but no peace. And from the Islamic Encyclopedia, I see that a hudna can be broken at any time by the Arabs, whereas there are words in the Arabic language that describe peace, and such as the peace agreements that were made between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan. But this is not what's being advocated. What we have here is a situation where the Palestinian Authority, which still operates under the authority of the Palestine National Council and the Palestine National Covenant, that covenant was supposed to be canceled, revoked, stopped as part of the Oslo process. We sent a crew to cover the meeting where they were supposed to cancel it on April 24th, 1996. They never canceled it. However, a U.S. ambassador to Israel at the time, Martin Indyk, gave his approval and said they canceled the covenant. It never happened. And the proof of the pudding is if you ask any Palestinian Authority official, have you canceled the covenant for destroying Israel? The answer is no. So what's very important to know is part of the basis for the support for the Palestinian Authority in transitive positions is the support they get in the Arab world. And that support is led by Saudi Arabia, which has been touted as a peace partner of late. Well, Saudi Arabia is the most important funder of the Palestinian Authority's school system and of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. In addition, Saudi Arabia leads the pack of nations that conduct not only boycotts, but international campaigns to delegitimate Israel. So we have our work cut out for us with a U.S. government that ignores these facts, and sometimes the government of Israel ignores these facts. So the war continues. The war continues now for 75 years. The war that was declared in 1948, and by the Palestinian Authority, by the League of Arab Nations, and in 1964 by the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They continue, and until they surrender, they will not stop. So all I can say is we're hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. This is David Bedein reporting from Jerusalem in June 2023. Thank you for watching. And you can see our website, by the way, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and we operate under private auspices, and there's a little red donor button there that people want to support our work. Thank you.